During Nvidia's CEO Jensen Huang's keynote presentation at GTC 2025, which I was privileged to see in person, a very important part of his presentation actually focused on autonomous driving, and it made me wonder if Tesla might be under threat from the likes of Nvidia and other companies like GM, who might end up using a more generalized solution like Nvidia's rather than licensing from Tesla. Could this create a situation where Tesla's full self-driving could be the equivalent of the Apple iPhone versus the Android iPhone, where everybody else basically uses Android and Apple stands alone? If that's the case, that really changes the dynamics of the autonomous driving market. So let's take a look. Hey y'all, it's Dr. Know-It-All. I was actually rather surprised during the keynote to see Jensen actually talk about autonomous driving and the fact that they have several partners that they're working with right now to create autonomous driving solutions. Obviously, they've been working in the humanoid robotics space with their Isaac Gym, which is a very impressive simulator that allows humanoid robots to experience the real world, simulated real world, over and over and over again, millions and millions of times, in order to become better and better at what they do. But part of his presentation focused on autonomous driving, and it's been sort of a foregone conclusion in the United States, at least, that nobody was really competing with Tesla. This seems to be a major competitor that could actually enter the race and give Tesla a real run for the money in terms of getting to the finish line of fully capable autonomous driving. So first I'm going to show my recording of the approximately 3-minute clip that Jensen introduces and talks about briefly before going on and talking about it at more length. It does have a lot of music. I'm kind of hoping I don't get hit with a copyright claim. Hopefully this is copyright-free music, and apologies, the sound is a little bit goofy, but I thought, hey, I could obviously go find the clip from the broadcast version of the keynote, but this is where I was sitting in the audience and I thought it was kind of cool. So anyway, hopefully everything will work, and then I'll come back and talk about the consequences in particular for Tesla.
Yeah, let's take a look.
Nvidia is accelerating AI development for AVs with Omniverse and Cosmos. Cosmos prediction and reasoning capabilities support AI-first AV systems that are end-to-end trainable with new methods of development. Model distillation, closed-loop training, and synthetic data generation. First, model distillation. Adapted as a policy model, Cosmos's driving knowledge transfers from a slower, intelligent teacher to a smaller, faster student inferenced in the car. The teacher's policy model demonstrates the optimal trajectory, followed by the student model learning through iterations, until it performs at nearly the same level as the teacher. The distillation process bootstraps a policy model, but complex scenarios require further tuning. Closed-loop training enables fine-tuning of policy models. Log data is turned into 3D scenes for driving closed-loop in physics-based simulation using Omniverse neural reconstruction. Variations of these scenes are created to test the model's trajectory generation capabilities. Cosmos Behavior Evaluator can then score the generated driving behavior to measure model performance. Newly generated scenarios and their evaluation create a large dataset for closed-loop training, helping AVs navigate complex scenarios more robustly. Last, 3D synthetic data generation enhances AV's adaptability to diverse environments. From log data, Omniverse builds detailed 4D driving environments by fusing maps and images, and generates a digital twin of the real world, including segmentation, to guide Cosmos by classifying each pixel. Cosmos then scales the training data by generating accurate and diverse scenarios, closing the sim-to-real gap. Omniverse and Cosmos enable AVs to learn, adapt, and drive intelligently, advancing safer mobility.
Nvidia is the perfect company to do that. Gosh, that's our destiny. Use AI to recreate AI. The technology that we showed you there is very similar to the technology that you're enjoying to take you to a digital twin we call Nvidia.
All right, so a lot to unpack there. The very first thing is to start at the end when Jensen said, "This is our destiny to do this." So if Tesla, didn't perk up, if Tesla employees didn't perk up, I'm not exactly sure what they were doing. They were, sleeping on this, because clearly, if a gigantic company like Nvidia is interested in joining this space in a, not just like joining it, but dominating this space, which it clearly looks like from the presentation, right, from the video that they showed, and the fact that they also announced a strategic partnership with GM, and I also saw that they had the Volvo cars, Rivian cars, there was GM, and there was one other company, but there were several companies that had cars presented, near the Nvidia booth at GTC in the exhibition hall. So clearly there are many, many companies that are interested in working with Nvidia to solve autonomous driving, and that should cause Tesla some significant concern, because this is the kind of thing that a large company like Nvidia, pooled with all of these other companies, could collect data, and data might not be as important as we thought, of course, in the long term, because what we could be looking at is the simulation. That's basically what they talk about as Omniverse and Cosmos. They're able to combine these things to bootstrap a relatively small amount of physical data into, essentially infinitely large synthetic data. They can create as much synthetic data as they're interested in doing. Now, of course, Tesla has been doing this for years. At AI Day 2022, which was the last time we got a really good insight into what Tesla was doing, they were already doing this kind of simulation using Unreal Engine and everything, but they have always kind of depended on the fact that they had this insane amount of data, and that was their big moat. That was the thing, is that people were driving Tesla cars around all over the place, gathering all of this data, and thereby creating this data flywheel, and they could use simulation to boost that data that they got, but that the physical actual data was what was king for Tesla. But as you could hear from this presentation, and especially at the end, Nvidia is gunning for actually coming in and not only, be competing in this space, but it sounds like kind of dominating in this space. So let's go back and quickly, break apart what their plan is. It's a fairly similar plan to what we've seen with what Tesla has done and with humanoid robots in particular. But essentially what Nvidia is doing is they're leveraging the system that they've come up with for humanoid robots to do this for autonomous driving, which in the grand scheme of things is a relatively more simple project, right? Humanoid robots have to interact with things like pick up phones, pick up glasses, cases, interact with the world. Cars basically don't want to interact with the world. They want to stay away from everything. Now, the downside of cars, of course, is safety. They're very heavy. They move very, very quickly. The time to make a decision is very, very small. The consequences of making a wrong decision could be someone could get injured or killed, right? So those make the stakes extremely high, whereas humanoid robots, the stakes can be much, much lower. If you haven't seen my interview with Bernd Bornisch, you should definitely check that out. I'll leave it up here and put it at the end. It is a really good interview because he talks about the fact that their 1X, their Neo Gamma, is only 30 kilos. It's very light. It's got a soft exterior covering. If you bump into it or hit it or it falls down or something, maybe you could hurt the machine, but you're not going to hurt yourself. It's not heavy. It's not moving very quickly. So the stakes are much, much lower. You can have one of those things around you with much less safety concerns than a vehicle, which is, a tons, right? It's 3 or 4 or 6,000 pounds or something. It's a massive, massive object, and it's going very, very rapidly. So that's why autonomous driving has been so difficult. It's easy to do if you're going just, a couple of miles an hour or kilometers an hour very, very slowly in a car, and you have all the time in the world to make a decision, but no one is going to buy a car like that. They're not going to use a car like that because they're going to be like, this is insane. And so to create a useful vehicle that is autonomous is very, very challenging because of the safety concerns, which is not such a big deal for humanoid robots. I'm going to get back to talking about that when I get home. I'm currently in Chicago at another conference in another hotel room. But when I get home, I really want to talk about Optimus. I've got some stuff to say about Optimus and the humanoid robot space in general. So definitely, subscribe and stuff so you can see that one. But let's go back and let's watch a little bit of this and talk about the details of this, their project and what's going on here.
Nvidia is accelerating AI development for AVs with Omniverse and Cosmos. Cosmos prediction and reasoning capabilities.
So here, what you can see is there's like a text, there's an auto generation. They can generate scenarios, generate a left turn in an urban environment during winter with wipers on, right? And then it says there's a reason the vehicle is traveling on a 2-lane road with snow and ice visible, right? You can see all of that kind of stuff. So basically you can ask it to generate these scenes and it will generate these scenes, and they're fairly photorealistic. Now, I'm assuming that Nvidia is doing what Tesla has done, which is integrating the hardware elements of it into the software. In other words, modeling real physical cameras, the actual hardware that's used in the car, the optical distortions, all of that kind of stuff. If they're not doing that, then you've got a long gap between simulation and reality. But I would assume that they've got some sort of base hardware system that they recommend. They're like, buy these cameras, buy this, board, this Jetson Thor or whatever, and utilize these tools, and you too can have this. And so the huge advantage they have with Omniverse and Cosmos is if you can just type this stuff in and get these scenes out, which it looks like that's what they're doing, you would be able to generate all of these scenarios. In fact, you could have a large language model come up with these scenarios, right? You as a human don't even have to do that. You could have, an LLM like ChatGPT or something like that. You could task it with coming up with 1 million different scenarios for these cars to drive in. It could then type these things up. We can then generate the scenes, and all of this stuff can be done without human intervention. And so you can get a lot of that initial training done in simulation without even really tasking human beings to do this. So if this works as advertised, and sometimes Nvidia releases stuff that's not as good as what they claim it is. So, I'm not saying that they have this as a done deal and it's automatically going to work perfectly, but if it works as advertised, this is a pretty substantial capability that they have that would allow these car companies, these competing car companies, to license from Nvidia instead and get a massive amount of data and get very close to having an autonomous vehicle from the get-go without having to do any work on their own.
Or AI-first AV systems that are end-to-end trainable with new methods of development. Model distillation, closed-loop training, and synthetic data generation.
So the 3 modalities are model distillation, closed loop training, and synthetic data generation. We just talked about the synthetic data generation. You can generate any kind of scenario you want. Distillation is interesting. It's, again, very briefly mentioned. It doesn't go into any detail, but the basic idea is you train a very large, very smart model that then distills its information into a much, much smaller model that can run more efficiently. So if you think about it, right, you could take something that fit in a giant GPU rack or even a cluster of computers. You could run that over and over and over again to train it to become really, really good. And then you can take a small model that can fit into a portable computer, like something that can fit on a car, and you can use the teacher model, right, the big, giant, massive model that would never fit in a car. You have that educate this little baby model over and over and over again until it gets good enough to behave very, very, very similar to the big, large, cumbersome model that you could never put on a car. And that little portable model you can then put into vehicles. Now, we've seen distillation work amazingly well in large language models to teach, the big models teach the little models to be much better. DeepSeek R1 is a great example. It actually has taught Llama 70B, I think 3.2, I'm trying to remember. But anyway, one of the Llama 3 series, it's taught the 70 billion parameter, which is a pretty small model, relatively speaking. It's taught it to be much, much smarter than it was just sort of out of the box. And so what you can see is the possibility of having a distillation of the knowledge of a machine, of a model that would never fit into a car, much, much too big, much too power hungry, all of that kind of stuff can get squeezed into a smaller model. Now, it's again clear that Tesla is doing some things like that, and they're, especially between hardware 4 and hardware 3, they're distilling a lot of their hardware 4 model into hardware 3 cars to be able to allow them to operate as efficiently as possible. But it's not clear that this is a foundational aspect of what Tesla is doing. It's very, very cool what Nvidia is doing, and there may be a latecomer advantage that Nvidia has because they've been able to watch what Tesla and other companies have done, what's worked, what hasn't worked, and start kind of with a clean slate instead of having all of these years of encumbered software and everything to be able to walk in and say, okay, if we're going to do this with a clean sheet today, how would we do this? That first principles design idea. And then the last part of this is closed loop training, where they're able to do cycles and cycles and cycles of training to be able to kind of put the finishing touches on their autonomous vehicles.
First, model distillation. Adapted as a policy model, Cosmos' driving knowledge transfers from a slower, intelligent teacher to a smaller, faster student inferenced in the car. The teacher's policy model demonstrates the optimal trajectory.
So that would be this first car up here. You're seeing it like right there. And then the student models are like these blue guys here.
Followed by the student model learning through iterations until it performs at nearly the same level as the teacher.
So that's the whole idea of the distillation model, is you have the big, cumbersome, smart model that teaches the little faster, lightweight model over and over and over again until it gets to where that lightweight model is just as good. Very, very, clever and useful way to do it.
The distillation process bootstraps a policy model, but complex scenarios require further tuning. Closed-loop training enables fine-tuning of policy models. Log data is turned into 3D scenes for driving closed-loop in physics-based simulation using Omniverse neural reconstruction.
So that's a mouthful, but in essence, what they're talking about is edge cases here, or corner cases, right? You're talking about, well, okay, so you modeled a bunch of these things, but this didn't work still. Well, what you can do is you can take real world data and you can convert that into synthetic data using Omniverse and Cosmos, creating these 3D reconstructions of very specific scenarios. And again, Tesla's talked about this, right? A couple of years ago at AI Day 2022. So that's 2.5 years ago now, they were talking about this exact same thing. So this isn't anything new, but it's just interesting to see another company doing this. But basically they're able to create these real world physics simulations, 3D simulations that optically look the same as the real environment, but they can remove cars, they can put cars in, they can move where the sun angle is, they can change the parameters of the experiment over and over and over again. And again, we saw Tesla talking about this a couple of years ago, but you're seeing another company with some, big chops, one of the most valuable companies in the world entering this space. You have to perk up and take notice of this when they're doing that.
Variations of these scenes are created to test the model's trajectory generation capabilities. Cosmos Behavior Evaluator can then score the generated driving behavior to measure model performance.
So what they've done is they've created a judge. Basically, a human doesn't have to come in here and judge how well the car did. You're creating a separate neural network that is just there to judge how well the driving neural network did. It's substituting for, when you took your driver's license test, right? There's the guy in the thing with the clipboard or whatever. It's probably an iPhone now, the way they type in the notes. But anyway, it's substituting for that. It's the grader, but they've trained this grader network to be able to grade how well the car is driving through these simulated real environments. Again, you can take a real environment, convert it to a 3D scene, manipulate where the other cars are and the other circumstances and stuff, and then drive it over and over and over again. And instead of having to have a human evaluate it, you have a grader evaluate it. That's very clever, and that is a good way of removing humans from the loop, because we, of course, are the slowest part of the chain. Assuming, of course, the grader, it looks like Drive AV is the name of this thing, assuming that that is working fairly well, that allows it to train, again, just can run all day and all night on thousands of GPUs simultaneously because it's parallelizable, and it can learn much, much faster than real time, and you don't have to have humans involved in this process at all.
Newly generated scenarios and their evaluation create a large dataset for closed-loop training, helping AVs navigate complex scenarios more robustly. Last, 3D synthetic data generation enhances AV's adaptability to diverse environments. From log data, Omniverse builds detailed 4D driving environments by fusing maps and images, and generates a digital twin of the real world, including segmentation, to guide Cosmos by classifying each pixel. Cosmos then scales the training data. Okay,
and so they're back to the 3D generation and stuff. But this is an interesting screen grab here. This semantic segmentation portion they just go through really quickly. But what they've got is they've color coded the elements in the scene. So you can see that the red is the Mercedes, like the hood of the Mercedes and stuff. The orange is the road surface. The red little stripy things are the lane markers. The pink is the bus stop or whatever that thing is over there. There's the buildings that are in kind of a teal color, and then there's ones that are in the background. You've also got the blue for the trees, you've got green for the streetlights, you've got green for other cars. So, and then of course you've got some sort of like, I'm not exactly sure what color that is. Again, sort of a teal color for the edge of the road or something. But anyway, you've got all of these different colors that shows that the computer recognizes all of these things in real time. It's able to process all of this, say, these are all the things that I care about. And again, relatively speaking, it's much, much easier to interact with the world in a car than it is as a humanoid robot, because all you're trying to do is not hit stuff. That's all you care about. You want to go fast, but you don't want to hit anything. And so this semantic segmentation appears to be perfectly capable of having the car understand where the lanes are, where the other vehicles are, where the edges of the road are, where things like garbage cans and potentially humans and stuff like that are. And that means that this, in theory at least, should be incredibly good at driving. It should not have to do too much more work because it's able to train on its own in these 3D environments with the closed loop training, with the synthetic data, with all of this other stuff, with a policy network that is trained separately, with distillation, with all of these things. It means that you have what could be a very worthy competitor and something that could get up to driving autonomously to a very high level of satisfaction relatively quickly. So with all of that being said, the big question is this something that should keep Tesla up at night? I think yes, but not sleepless nights. In other words, it should probably make them go like, whoa, this is a serious company that's doing serious work, and there are serious companies in China that are doing serious work as well. But this is all, at this point, theory. This is all stuff that has not been demonstrated in the real world yet. We haven't seen it happen. Tesla was doing autonomous driving almost a decade ago on the highway. They were doing things where it was a very, very different world. It was a different network, all of that kind of stuff. But by 2016, 2017, certainly by 2018, 2019, 2020, Tesla was doing this stuff, and it was working well on environments that were relatively controlled, like highways and stuff. But as you can tell, it's 2025 now, so it's somewhere between 5 and 10 years since Tesla, depending on how you want to define it, began to put cars into the real world that were driving autonomously to some extent, and they are still perfecting it. So this is something that clearly, because of the very, very high safety bar that needs to be met, is not something that you just jump into and put on the road after a couple of months of training. It's going to require a massive amount of data collection and safety testing and putting into cars and stuff, right? Tesla, one of their advantages in terms of vehicle construction is that they've been making the cars with all of the correct hardware in it since 2018, 2019. And then of course with hardware 4 in it since 2023 sometime. So they've had this stuff in these vehicles for a long time. You want to take a Mercedes, you want to take a Rivian, you want to take a GM car, a Ford car, a Toyota, whatever. If you want to put these things in there, they have to build them into the vehicles. That takes some time. Then of course you have to collect the data in those specific vehicles. Then you have to do your initial training. Then you have to look at the safety metrics of that training. And then you have to have a company, and this is a big deal because this is something that Tesla was willing to do, that's willing to put this stuff out on the road and allow users to use it, at least in limited circumstances. All of these steps take time, and the last step takes a lot of guts, because many companies are going to be like, no, I don't think I want to do this. And they'll be like a not me first, right? Have somebody else do it and prove it out and prove that it works with Nvidia's solution or Tesla's solution. And then once we see that it works, we'll jump on board and we'll license then. So there's going to be a lot of hesitancy on that last step to actually putting cars into the real world. So my conclusion is that Tesla really needs to be paying attention to this. They need to be accelerating their effort even faster, as if they're not working fast enough already, but that they probably don't have to worry about this stuff coming out tomorrow. It's going to take some time just because of the safety bar that has to be met by this. Humanoid robots, I think, are a much more competitive space. And like I said, I want to talk about Optimus and other humanoid robots very, very soon once I get home. But in the meantime, I thought this was well worth discussing. And hopefully this information about how Nvidia is approaching autonomous driving and how that relates to what Tesla has been doing for years is a valuable contribution to the discussion. All right, that's what I've got. If you don't mind, again, please do like the video, especially early on. It really helps out the channel. And if you want to see more of this kind of content and other stuff about AI and autonomy and everything, please consider subscribing. And in the meantime, I will see you in the next video. Bye-bye.